Hey YouTube friends, today I want to talk to you about live music photography, gig photography, often a photographer's nightmare, capturing fast-moving objects in incredibly low light. So after shooting a gig last week, I thought I would talk about a few tips and settings which I used, so let's do this. So yeah, a friend of mine, Candy, is in a band, Lazybones for Life, yo. They did a gig last Tuesday, Halloween, at the Green Door store in Brighton. I thought I would go along, take my camera and see if I could get some decent shots. I knew it was going to be challenging, but actually really pleased with the results that I got and a few things which were very important to get the results that I did, so I thought I would share them with you. First of all, let's talk about lenses, right? Your choice of lens for this kind of setting is going to be really important. And what I mean by this kind of setting is gigs are often in incredibly low light. They're often in dark, atmospheric settings with just a few sort of stage lights. So straight away, your choice of lens becomes really important. Now for me, I was using a 24-70 Canon lens with f2.8, which is pretty good in low light, but really you want a lens which can have a super wide aperture, something really low, like a 50mm 1.4, something like that, something that lets a huge amount of light in. The wider you can get your aperture, then the more flexibility you will have with your other settings. So choice of lens does become quite important for this kind of photography. Which leads me on to aperture, really. Always shoot wide open when you're at a gig. Get as much light in to your exposure triangle through aperture as you possibly can, so it will give you more flexibility with your other settings. So if your lens goes as low as 2.8, then that's going to be what you're using. If you're lucky enough to have like a prime or something that goes down to 1.8 or 1.4, then definitely you're going to feel the benefit of that extra light that you're getting in through that lens. Okay, tip number 2, shutter speed. Tricky one, shutter speed. Obviously, your subjects are likely to be moving. Lazybones, they're sort of a rock band, so they were getting their rock on, which meant that in order to freeze the action in the photographs, I needed to be using about 1/100th of a second shutter speed. Sometimes I would have liked to have been at 200ths of a second to really freeze that action. However, this is always going to be a way up between how much light you're getting in, and the faster your shutter speed, the darker your images will be. So it's about just sort of balancing that. But somewhere between 100th and 200th, you've got a pretty good chance of freezing that action. At times, I was shooting at sort of 1/60th of a second, which was okay, and a sacrifice I was willing to make. There was the images weren't quite as sharp at times, but they were brighter, so it's a way up. It's always going to be a way up in a dark gig environment. Which leads me on to the next sort of section of the exposure triangle, which is your ISO. And unless you're shooting with a sort of one of the newer Sony cameras like the A7S, which has got insane low light capabilities, then ISO will inevitably, the higher your ISO goes, you're going to introduce more grain and more noise into your images, which is difficult and can lead to a low quality image. However, when you're in low light, that kind of goes out the window a bit. Normally, if you're in the daytime shooting something, then you want your ISO as low as you possibly can, so you get the cleanest possible image that you can. However, if you're at a gig and it's at dark, then use the ISO that will get the job done. So I was shooting, for the majority of the gig, I was at 6400 ISO, which for video work, I would just never even dream of using that high an ISO because it's such a grainy image that is produced. And at times I was up over 12,000 for ISO, which is kind of the maximum that my Canon 700D is capable of. And yes, the images are noisy, they are grainy images, but they're better exposed. So I would rather use a faster shutter speed and freeze and capture a sharp image, but then have some noise, rather than have a clean image which is too dark or blurry in some cases. So ISO, ideally you want it to be as low as possible, but the reality is don't be afraid to really crank that ISO up so that you get a brighter image, or so that you can speed up your shutter and get a sharper focused image. Does that make sense? Good. So that's it really, just a few tips to help you with gig photography. Just to summarise, lens choice. You want something fast and wide open, aperture Always shoot wide open to get as much light as you possibly can. Shutter speed, try and keep it between 100th and 200th of a second, but maybe you can get away with a little bit slower if needs be. And finally, ISO, don't be afraid to crank the ISO. Sometimes you just have to do that to get the image out of the camera. So I'll just leave you with a few of the shots that I took last week, and yeah, see what you think. If you like these tips, think about subscribing to the channel, give the video a thumbs up. I upload quite regular videos. I hope you enjoyed watching, and I'll see you next time.